It's week 34. We are on day 3. And we're going to take a break from Jeremiah and we're going to hear from yet a different prophet. This time, the prophet Obadiah, as well as a couple of Psalms, Psalm 82 and 83. Obadiah is a small book. In fact, it's easy to miss as you're passing through the pages of the minor prophets in the back of your back of your Old Testament. It's small, but it's powerful. And yet, at the same time, we might think, well, what does this say to us today? The message of Obadiah is to proclaim judgment against the Edomites. Now, who are the Edomites? They are a kingdom located to the southeast of what used to be Jerusalem and Judah. And more importantly, they are some fellow descendants of the original patriarchs. If we go back in time, Abraham, Isaac's wife Rebekah gave birth to Esau and Jacob. Now, Jacob, of course, became the next patriarch, and he was named Israel, for which the nation was called. But his older brother Esau, you might remember him. He was the big, hairy fellow who had a love for the outdoors. And even though he was the oldest, he actually sold away his birthright to his younger brother in exchange for a bowl of stew because he was so hungry. And he had so little regard for what was meant to be his. He then lost out on the blessing by his father when his younger brother and his mom conspired to trick their father into giving the blessing to Jacob. Now, Jacob had run away because knew Esau was angry with him. When they were eventually reunited, Esau was fine. He had also managed to flourish in the time that they were apart and basically said, let's let bygones be bygones. Well, Esau and his descendants ended up becoming the people known as Edomites. And so they settled in a land to the southeast of what we now know as Israel. But what's happening here is that Obadiah is claiming judgment against the people of Edom who were there at the time that Jerusalem and Judah were being sent into exile. And he's calling on them because they gloated over Judah's demise and they took advantage rather than supporting their distant kin. Basically, they were looking at this as, you stole our ancestors' birthright and the blessing that was deserved to him, and so now you're finally getting what you deserve for being the trickster, for being that pain in the butt little brother. But Obadiah says, that's not right. We are still family, we are still kin, and we should have looked out for one another, and you should have looked out for us. And so there is judgment proclaimed against the nation of Edom. And what we see in the Psalms then is that the psalmist in both of these pleads with God to bring justice on earth. Things are not fair. Things are not going the way that they should go in a perfect world, in the way that God would intend them to go if we were following God's rule and following God's ways. The fact of the matter is that whether it was written at the time of the exile from Judah to Babylon or it was written today, we still need God's justice. We look around us and we see the way that things fall apart and people don't follow after God's will. Let us be a people who follow after God's will and lead the way to justice for all people, including ourselves.